Have you ever wondered if someone could endure the horrors of hell and return to tell the tale? I never believed such a thing was possible, not until it happened to me. What I experienced was so horrifying, so overwhelming, that some of those memories still haunt me to this day. Putting it into words is nearly impossible, but one thing is certain, it changed me forever. And now I carry an urgent message, a warning you must hear before it's too late. If you're looking for hope and need a second chance, this story is for you. And before you start, don't forget to subscribe because here you'll find more stories like this that could change your life. From a young age, my life was marked by suffering. I can't recall a single day of peace at home. My parents fought constantly, shouting matches, cruel insults, and sometimes even objects crashing against the walls were part of my daily life. But the worst pain I endured was far more devastating. My father wasn't just violent, he crossed a line no father should ever cross. What he did left wounds that went far beyond the physical. It shattered something deep within me, something that would take years to even begin to mend. I kept that horrible secret locked away because my mother, she knew. I could see it in her face, the way her eyes lingered on me, the way she avoided looking too closely. She knew what was happening. But for reasons I couldn't understand back then, she never spoke up. She never tried to stop it. She never tried to save me. And then one day, she was gone. Without a word, without a goodbye, she walked out the door and never came back. She left me there, alone, with him. With no love, no support, and no hope, I was pushed into marriage at just 17. I thought I was escaping my nightmare, but I had no idea I was stepping into another one. The pain I felt that day is hard to describe. It was as if the last fragile piece of hope I had was torn from me. I felt utterly abandoned, trapped in a life that felt like an endless cycle of suffering. My husband wasn't violent like my father, but that didn't mean my life was peaceful. Our home was cold, lifeless, as if something heavy and oppressive hung over it like a dark cloud. My husband drank often, and when he wasn't lost in alcohol, he barely acknowledged I was there. I felt invisible, like my existence didn't matter. Desperate for comfort, I turned to the Catholic Church. I went to Mass, lit candles, and prayed with everything I had, but nothing seemed to change. Every prayer felt like it disappeared into thin air, never reaching heaven. It felt like God didn't hear me, or worse, that he didn't care. Then came the night I reached my breaking point. Overwhelmed by hopelessness, I locked myself in my room, fell to my knees, and with tears streaming down my face, I cried out with everything I had. Jesus, if you're real, then prove it. Because I can't take this anymore. In that moment, I didn't know if he was listening. I didn't know if he was even real. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like that, and I was desperate for something, anything, to change. I thought I had already faced the worst life could throw at me, but I was wrong. Somehow, things managed to grow even darker. My daughter, the little girl I once cradled in my arms, started keeping company with the wrong people. At first, I convinced myself it was just a phase, some form of teenage rebellion that would pass. But soon, I realized it was far more serious. She began to pull away from our family, and eventually, I discovered the heartbreaking truth: she had fallen into prostitution. My son, on the other hand, tried to drown his pain in alcohol. Night after night, he would stumble home, his eyes bloodshot and his words slurred. I tried to reach him, but it felt like the boy I had raised was gone, replaced by someone lost in addiction, an empty shell of who he used to be. I blamed myself for everything. I was tormented by the thought that I had failed as a mother. Maybe if I had done things differently, maybe if I had been stronger. Guilt and despair consumed me. I felt trapped in a relentless cycle of pain and regret, and I couldn't see a way out. Then came the night when the weight of it all became too much to bear. I decided I couldn't go on. I reached for a bottle of pills, poured a glass of water, and without hesitation, I swallowed them all. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about what came next. I just wanted the pain to stop. What happened after that is something I will never forget. I felt my heart stop. Darkness swallowed me whole. My life seemed to vanish like a candle flame snuffed out by the wind. But then, I found myself outside my own body. I could see myself lying on the bed, pale, motionless, lifeless. And before I could even process what was happening, an invisible force seemed to seize me. I was being pulled, dragged, downward. I descended through a tunnel, a dark, endless void. The air grew thick and suffocating. A foul stench filled my lungs, the burning, choking scent of sulfur. My throat felt scorched from the inside. The further I fell, the louder the screams became, tortured cries of agony that seemed to tear through my soul. Desperate voices screamed for help, but no one came. When I finally reached the end of that endless tunnel, I understood where I was. I was in hell. The darkness wasn't absolute. A sickly red glow flickered across the walls, revealing twisted shadows of bodies writhing in torment. The heat was unbearable. I felt like my skin might ignite just from the air itself. And then I saw them, demons. Hideous creatures with grotesque faces twisted in hatred. They carried spears, jagged hooks, and rusted chains. I watched in horror as they tormented the souls trapped there. Each hook tore into flesh, and just when the wounds seemed unbearable, they would heal, only for the torture to begin again. It was an endless cycle of agony, a suffering that seemed to have no limit. Among the tormented, I saw a young woman. I somehow knew she had taken her own life. Her face was twisted in sorrow and despair as a demon plunged a jagged hook into her body. She screamed in agony, writhing and thrashing, but there was no escape. When her body was finally torn to shreds, it instantly restored itself, and the torment began all over again. Her pain seemed to fuel the demons attacking her, as if her suffering was their twisted delight. In the midst of this horror, I heard a voice, one that stood out from the others. It was a man, a pastor. His face was buried in his hands as he sobbed bitterly. Between his cries, he repeated the same words over and over. I thought I was saved. I thought I was saved. The anguish in his voice pierced my heart. That man, a pastor who had once preached about salvation, was now trapped in torment, his cries filled with regret that came too late. But then I noticed someone else, a young man. His face revealed a troubled mind, as if he had been mentally challenged in life. He rocked back and forth, muttering the same heartbreaking words over and over. No one told me, no one told me. Those words stabbed me like a knife. He seemed like someone who had been forgotten, neglected by those who should have guided him. Now, there he was, suffering alongside the others, with no hope of escape. As I looked around, I realized hell wasn't filled with just one type of person. I saw liars, murderers, adulterers, thieves. Each one suffered a torment that reflected their earthly sins. Some were devoured by worms that never stopped gnawing at their flesh. Others burned in flames that endlessly consumed their bodies, yet their flesh would regenerate, only to be burned again. The agony on their faces was indescribable, eyes wide with terror, mouths frozen in endless screams. The air was filled with cries of despair, a sound that seemed to tear through my very soul. But what horrified me most wasn't the pain. It was the utter hopelessness. Hell wasn't just a place of physical torment, it was a place of mental and emotional torture. Regret, guilt, and sorrow crushed every thought of relief. There was no comfort, no peace, and worst of all, no presence of God. In that place, there was only darkness, suffering, and endless horror. In the middle of that chaos, when I thought all hope was gone, something happened. A light appeared. It was powerful, so brilliant that my eyes could barely withstand it. Yet unlike the flames of hell, this light didn't burn or hurt. Instead, it brought peace. A peace deeper than anything I had ever felt. The darkness seemed to shrink back before this light, and even the endless screams seemed to grow quieter in its presence. And then, I saw him. Jesus. His face radiated love and holiness, but there was something else. Something that struck me deeply. His eyes carried a profound sadness, a grief that seemed to weigh heavily on him, as if he felt the pain of that dreadful place. He walked toward me with calm, steady steps. Though I knew I was standing before the King of Kings, I felt no fear. Instead, his presence surrounded me like a protective shield, guarding me from the horrors I had just witnessed. Jesus looked directly into my eyes, and in that gaze, I realized something incredible. He knew everything about me. He knew my pain, my failures, my sins. Every tear I had cried and every dark thought I had ever carried. Yet in his eyes, there was no condemnation, only compassion and love. Then he spoke, his voice firm, yet filled with sorrow. Go back and tell the church to live in peace. Many who claim to follow me are destroying themselves with arguments, envy, and unforgiveness. Those words pierced my heart. I knew they were true. Memories of conflict, gossip, and pride among believers flooded my mind. I remembered how easily Christians had turned on one another, attacking, dividing, and forgetting the love they were called to share. Jesus continued. People are so busy pointing out each other's mistakes that they've forgotten to humble themselves before me. Tell them to be patient and humble in their prayers. Many are being deceived by Satan because they aren't watchful. His words felt like a sword cutting through my soul. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, as if he was pleading, begging for people to return to him with sincerity. I understood in that moment that many who claimed to follow Jesus were falling straight into the enemy's traps, blinded by pride, judgment, and self-righteousness. Finally, Jesus looked at me one last time. This time, his voice was softer, yet filled with absolute authority. Now go back, and follow the path I have prepared for you. In an instant, that powerful light enveloped me, and the horrors of hell faded away. I woke up gasping for air, my heart racing and tears soaking my pillow. The weight of what I had seen still clung to me, the horrifying vision of hell, the sorrow in Jesus' voice, and his gaze that seemed to pierce right through my soul. I knew I couldn't keep living the way I had been. Something inside me cried out for change, a desperate, urgent need to turn my life around. The very next day, still trembling from the experience, I sought out an evangelical church. As soon as I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. A profound peace that seemed to wrap around me like a warm embrace. The words the pastor spoke felt like they were meant just for me. It was as if God himself was whispering into my heart, "This is where you need to be." I couldn't hold back. When the pastor called those who wanted to give their lives to Christ, I stepped forward, fell to my knees, and surrendered everything to Jesus. In that moment, I felt as though a crushing weight had been lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I felt hope. But my newfound faith came at a cost. My husband despised my decision. He mocked me relentlessly, sneering every time I mentioned church. "Go waste your time with those Christians, as if that's going to fix anything," he'd say with disgust. He didn't stop at words. Sometimes he'd hide my clothes to keep me from going to church or even lock the door when I tried to leave. Other times, I'd return home only to find him drunk, waiting to yell at me and hurl insults. But I refused to give up. Every humiliation, every harsh word, every tear I cried, I laid it all before Jesus. Instead of fighting back, I would kneel in my room and pray, "Lord, touch my husband's heart, change his life just as you've changed mine." And then, something incredible started to happen. Slowly, his heart began to soften. The mocking stopped, and I noticed him quietly observing me more and more. One night, as I knelt in prayer, I sensed someone standing behind me. When I turned around, I saw my husband, tears running down his face. "Why didn't you give up on me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I stood, took his hands in mine, and said softly, "Because Jesus didn't give up on me, and he hasn't given up on you either." Not long after, something happened that I never thought possible. My husband walked into church with me. He sat quietly during the service, and when the pastor called those who wanted to surrender their lives to Jesus, my husband stood up and walked to the front. There, in front of everyone, he knelt down, weeping, and gave his life to Christ. At that moment, I knew Jesus' words were true. Patience, humility, and unwavering faith can break even the hardest of hearts. Even after my conversion and my husband's transformation, there was still a deep wound that refused to heal. My children. My daughter had fallen into prostitution, and my son had become an alcoholic. They were both trapped in the same destructive patterns that had once plagued our family. I knew I couldn't force them to change, but I also knew I couldn't stop praying for them. Night after night, I knelt beside my bed and cried out to God, "Lord, save my children. I refuse to accept that Satan has control over them. Break those chains and bring them back to you." There were moments when my faith wavered. When my daughter vanished for weeks without a word, I feared the worst. When my son stumbled home drunk, his eyes empty and lifeless, my heart broke all over again. But I kept praying. One night, while I was deep in prayer, I felt a gentle voice whisper in my spirit, "Don't stop praying. I am working." And then, things began to change. One evening, my daughter showed up at our doorstep. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying. She fell to her knees, sobbing, "Mom, I can't live like this anymore. I knelt beside her, holding her trembling body in my arms. As she wept, I knew a spiritual battle had been won. In the days that followed, she began coming to church with me. I watched in awe as her life transformed before my eyes. The young woman who had once been lost now found comfort and purpose in Jesus. She left her past behind, surrendered her life to Christ, and finally discovered peace. But my son's battle was even harder. Alcohol had consumed his life, and his outbursts of rage became more frequent. "Mom, it's useless. I'm a failure," he cried one night, his voice filled with despair. But I didn't stop praying. One night, he stumbled home drunk and collapsed in the living room. I knelt beside him, laid my hand on his head, and whispered with all my strength, "Lord, break this addiction. Set my son free just as you set me free." The next morning, he woke up trembling. "Mom, I had a dream. I was locked in a dark cell, and then I heard a voice say, 'You don't have to live like this. I am the way out.'" He didn't understand it at the time, but I knew God had spoken to him. A few days later, my son asked to come to church with me. That night, when the pastor invited those who wanted to surrender their lives to Jesus, my son walked to the altar. There he knelt down crying, and gave his life to Christ. From that day forward, he never touched alcohol again. His heart was changed, his mind was clear, and for the first time, I saw hope in his eyes. The restoration of my family didn't happen overnight. It was a long and painful road, but today when I look back, I can see that every tear, every prayer, and every desperate moment was worth it. Because with God, no one is too far gone. I never imagined I would face him again. I was walking down the street, lost in thought, when I noticed a man slumped against a wall. His clothes were filthy, his hair tangled, and his face worn from years of hardship. In his trembling hand, he clutched a crushed can, quietly begging for spare change. I walked past him without much thought, but something made me stop. I turned back, and in that moment, the man lifted his face. My heart stopped. It was him. The man who had destroyed my childhood, my father. A flood of memories came rushing back, the pain, the fear, the endless nights spent crying in silence. For a moment, I wanted to walk away and never look back. "He doesn't deserve your help," a bitter thought whispered inside me. But before I could take another step, I heard something else. A calm yet unmistakable voice. "Forgive him." I froze. Forgive him? After everything he had done? How could I forget the years of suffering? But the voice spoke again. "Forgive him." Tears welled in my eyes. I took a shaky breath, turned around, and walked back toward him. "Dad?" My voice trembled. His weary eyes met mine, and for a moment, he didn't seem to recognize me. But then his face changed, eyes wide, lips quivering. "Daughter?" He lowered his head and began to sob. I'm sorry," he mumbled through his tears. In that moment, the bitterness that had poisoned my heart for years began to fade. I knew he didn't deserve forgiveness, but I also knew I couldn't carry that burden any longer. I chose to obey Jesus. I knelt down and embraced my father. His frail body trembled in my arms. The pain didn't vanish instantly, but I felt the chains of hatred breaking inside me. I took him home. I bathed him, trimmed his hair, and prepared a warm meal. As he ate, I shared the story of Jesus, the same Jesus who had healed my wounds and was now giving me the strength to forgive. For days, my father barely spoke. He just listened. Then one night, he broke down in tears and whispered, "I never thought God could forgive me, but now I know He already has." Not long after, my father gave his life to Jesus. I was by his side when he took his final breath, a breath filled with peace. A peace he had searched for his entire life but only found in Christ. That day, I realized something powerful. Forgiveness didn't just set my father free, it set me free as well. But as time went on, I witnessed something far more subtle, yet incredibly dangerous, quietly poisoning families. It wasn't alcohol, or violence. It was television, and now, even more dangerously, the internet and social media. The Lord revealed to me how Satan has been using these tools to infiltrate Christian homes. What starts as innocent entertainment, a comedy show, a harmless cartoon, or a popular influencer, can slowly become a doorway for twisted ideas, rebellion, immorality, and spiritual compromise. I saw it happen firsthand. I knew a family that once stood strong in their faith. They prayed together, attended church, and seemed spiritually grounded. But gradually, things changed. A TV series that glorified sinful behavior, a comedy show that mocked Christian values, then social media influencers promoting greed, arrogance, and lust. The change was slow, almost invisible, but devastating. Their children, once kind and respectful, became disobedient and distant. The couple, who once rarely argued, started fighting constantly. And worst of all, God's presence seemed to fade from their home. Television isn't just a device, it's a door. And Satan doesn't need to force his way into your home. He only needs you to leave that door cracked open. Today, families spend countless hours consuming content that twists their minds and hardens their hearts, and often, they don't even realize it. I once knew a sweet, God-fearing young girl who changed completely after becoming addicted to toxic content online. She drifted away from her family, rejected her faith, and became lost in a world of confusion and rebellion. Don't think this can't happen to your family, because that's exactly what the enemy wants you to believe. Guard your home. I'm not saying you need to throw out your TV or delete social media, but you must be vigilant. Ask yourself, is this content glorifying God, or corrupting my heart? Parents, don't leave your children alone with their devices. The enemy is using influencers, music, and media to plant seeds of doubt, rebellion, and unbelief in their minds. The Bible warns us, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. Proverbs 4 verse 23. The media has an immense power to shape minds, and Satan knows it. He doesn't need you to leave the church to steal your soul. He just needs you to leave the TV on. Finally, I want to share a moment that still chills me to this day. One morning, I was in a rush to catch a bus for an important appointment. But everything seemed to go wrong. I overslept, couldn't find my keys, and every little delay seemed to frustrate me more. By the time I reached the bus stop, I saw my bus disappearing around the corner. I can't believe this, I muttered angrily. I felt defeated, frustrated, even angry at God. But later that morning, I turned on the TV, and what I saw left me frozen. The news was reporting a horrific accident. A bus had collided with a truck. There were no survivors. It was my bus. Had I caught it, I wouldn't be here sharing this story with you. I dropped to my knees and cried, not out of sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. In that moment, I understood something powerful. Sometimes God's delays are His greatest protection. We don't always see the dangers He spares us from, but He is always watching, always protecting. So if you're frustrated by delays, closed doors, or plans that seem to fail, remember this. What feels like a disappointment may be the very thing that saves your life. No matter how lost you feel, no matter how broken your life may seem, Jesus can restore you. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Because God is still working, and He's calling out to you today. If this message has touched you, subscribe now and stay connected. Each video will inspire you and help you escape the dangers that lead to eternal death. Your soul is too valuable to risk waiting.